Welcome to Talk Law Radio with attorney Todd Marquardt of the Marquardt Law Firm at marquardtlawfirm.com.
Welcome to Talk Law Radio. I'm Todd Marquardt. Today I'll be talking to you about water law, a fight between the states. Have you heard about the Supreme Court case between Texas and New Mexico? This case is about New Mexico violating an agreement between Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas. Before we get started talking about the law, let's begin with prayer. Dear God, thank you for this day and for all the gifts and blessings that you give us. Please forgive us for our sins, for our mistakes, for doing the wrong thing, and failing to follow your will. Please help the people in New Mexico put out the forest fire in Ruidoso. Please help the people of Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas come to an agreement about how to equitably allocate water from the Rio Grande. Help us to do everything we do for the good of your people, for our own good, and for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen. Now it's time for me to help you discover legal issue blind spots by listening to me talk about the law on the radio. Like I said, today we're going to be talking about this Supreme Court case. It's known as Texas versus New Mexico, and it all stems from this compact, which is an agreement between the states of Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas. But it also has an added feature that the Congress in Washington has also blessed this compact by making it a federal law. The reason that the Supreme Court heard this case is because the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction over cases involving a state. And this one involves those three states, Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas, because they all share this river water. And I have my bottle of water with me today because I've been talking about and thinking about water a lot, and so it made me thirsty. So in our Constitution, the United States Constitution, Article 3, Section 2, Clause 2, it says, "In all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, and those in which a state shall be a party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction. In all the other cases before mentioned, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction, both as to law and fact." So this is a case of original jurisdiction because it's a case that involves a state. We're used to hearing about the Supreme Court in its role as an appellate court, the final appellate court. When somebody files an appeal, it says that the judge got something wrong. That's not the case here. Okay, so there have been a lot of court cases between New Mexico and Texas over the issue of water. This one has been going on for about 10 years. In 2013, Texas requested declaratory, injunctive, and monetary relief to stop New Mexico from interfering with the U.S. operation of the Rio Grande project. We'll get into the Rio Grande project, what that means in a little bit. And in 2014, the United States government Bureau of Reclamation intervened. That means they joined the dispute. It had issues with New Mexico as well. Both the United States and Texas complained that the people have been pumping groundwater below Elephant Butte, which is a lake and a dam used to regulate the flow of the Rio Grande water. And so they complained that pumping groundwater below that point was reducing the efficiency of the project to a point where 43% of the available water could not be delivered to El Paso. So if you go on Facebook and search for Talk Law Radio, I have an image of a map that shows this river going from Colorado to New Mexico and Texas. And of course, the Rio Grande goes further than that. It's also brings water to Mexico. So there's lots of people that rely on this water. So the Supreme Court made a decision in 2014 that allowed the United States government, the federal government, to join the lawsuit. The court held then that the federal government has an interest in seeing that the water is deposited in the Elephant Butte Reservoir consistent with the compact's terms, as that is what allows the United States to meet its duties under the downstream contracts. That's the statute. Downstream contracts, Texas 583 U.S. Oh no, that's the citation for the lawsuit that said that. And so what happened recently is that the state of Texas and the state of New Mexico came to a settlement. They came to an agreement on how to resolve this, and the United States federal government said, no, we don't agree to that. And you can see how confusing that would be. So the issue was brought before the Supreme Court again as to whether the agreement could be enforced or not. And the Supreme Court said, no, the United States was not a party to the settlement. The federal government did not consent, citing concerns about groundwater pumping by New Mexico that could interfere with an irrigation system run by the federal government. So this all goes back to a treaty between the United States and Mexico back in 1906. A little while later, the federal government created this dam and reservoir called Elephant Butte. This is in a town in New Mexico called Truth or Consequences. People call it T or C for short. There's a whole joke and probably radio show about how it got its name, but I won't get into that right now. So the Elephant Butte is about 100 miles or 120 miles north of the Mexico border. And this is in the southern part of New Mexico. And it's essentially a lake. But they call it Elephant Butte because there's an island on this lake that looks like an elephant. It's really interesting. I'll post a picture of it, of the elephant, later today so that you can see it. Just search for me on Facebook, search for Talk Law Radio, and look for Lady Liberty holding the scales of justice and the red, white, and blue logo. And I'll tell you a funny story about a time that I went to Elephant Butte in just a little bit. The Reclamation Act of 1902 is part of this as well. The downstream contracts was a series of agreements between the United States and two irrigation districts in New Mexico and Texas. There was the Elephant Butte Irrigation District and the El Paso County Water Improvement District number 1 in Texas. And so there's farms along the Rio Grande, and those farms rely on this water to make their plants grow. the United States Constitution has a clause regarding agreements between states. It's Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3. It permits states to enter into agreements among themselves with the consent of Congress. So it's not just an agreement, a contract, but it's also a federal statute enacted by Congress that preempts contrary state law. So that's how the federal government got involved in this lawsuit between Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas. And Colorado is a party to the lawsuit just because they're a party to the agreement, not because anybody alleged that they did anything wrong. There was a statute in 1938, that's the Rio Grande Compact. It required Colorado to deliver water to New Mexico, and it required New Mexico to deliver water to Elephant Butte. The Reclamation Act required certain amounts to be distributed from Elephant Butte. So knowing that some years the Rio Grande would have more water than others, just by nature, there's flooding and there's droughts and there's normal times too. They created Elephant Butte so that water could be stored there and then released in a more controlled way. Well, in the 1940s and 50s is when the drought started happening. And so the farmers in southern New Mexico, below the Elephant Butte Reservoir, began pumping groundwater to support their agriculture. Well, you don't have to be a scientist to wonder if pumping the groundwater would deplete some of the water in the Rio Grande. And so that's the issue here is New Mexico doing that on purpose, or doesn't even have to be on purpose? If they're causing El Paso to receive less water, then they could be violating that agreement. How does this affect you? Why is this a legal issue blind spot for you? Well, do you drink water? If the river runs out of water, that could be a big problem for the people of New Mexico. And do you eat stuff that's grown by farmers? Or do you eat animals that eat the stuff that's grown by farmers? This is an issue for you. And so we need to be aware of it because if there's something that we can do, we should do something. Okay. Now, I'm from New Mexico. I love Texas, but I'm from New Mexico, and it's not a bad place there, but there's really no economy. And so I wanted to move to a state that had an economy, and I was blessed to have gone to school at St. Mary's University School of Law, and my wife and I decided to stay here and raise our kids here in San Antonio. But I still remember New Mexico. I remember where I come from, and I care about those people too. And so I was asking my family members and my inner circle about what they remember hearing about a water dispute in New Mexico. And my dad had some pretty good memories, so I'll share those with you. He remembered his grade school teacher, one of his grade school teachers, telling the class about this compact between Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas. And my dad said he remembered wondering what his uncles, who were farmers in Nebraska, would think about it. And he remembered his uncles telling him that farming depends on the weather. They said, it's got to rain, but not too much. And we can't have hail because it damages the crops. And so my dad remembered wondering what would happen if one of the states didn't follow the compact. He thought about how New Mexico put faith, trust, and dependence on the water of Colorado for the health and welfare of its citizens. He also told me a story about this rancher that he knew. This rancher owned the fourth largest ranch in the United States. And this rancher told him that whiskey was for drinking and water was for fighting over. Isn't that funny? Some other people told me they remember hearing talk about El Paso stealing New Mexico water. Isn't that funny how the New Mexicans would frame it that way, that El Paso was stealing their water, when really they were probably just trying to enforce the agreement. Well, someone else said settlers and homesteads along the river had certain water and irrigation rights to the river water. And I didn't look up those laws, but essentially they say that if your land is within such a particular distance from the water, that you can use that water. This gentleman said they have been limited in some growing seasons in their access of the water. And he said it's long been said that more people in the West have died in water disputes than for any other reason. Has that been your experience? Have you heard that before? And then he went on to say, there's little doubt in my mind that oil companies in the Permian Basin have pilfered groundwater on both sides of the state line. And he alleges that probably the military has done the same with regard to the construction and operation of McGregor Range, Fort Bliss, and White Sands Missile Range. So that should be investigated. Someone else from New Mexico was telling me about another lake that was supposed to help the water supply, called Bonito Lake, but it was contaminated by forest fires. And he said they cleaned it up after years, and it was open for one day before the forest fire started again, and now it's contaminated again. And the local water supply is hurting without the Bonito Lake. And he said the city is where he lives is raising water rates by 40% starting now, and 3% increases every year after. Can you imagine a 40% larger water bill just in one day? He said lots of people are upset because people are saying they could have started 3% a year hikes 10 years ago, or whenever there was that first fire, and it would have been more gradual and reasonable. Okay, here's another law that you might not think about with regard to water, or maybe you would. I just ran into it when I was researching this court case, and it's the fact that the Environmental Protection Agency gets involved in water as well. In New Mexico, in the Rio Grande, the EPA got involved to protect the silvery minnow. Again, I can post a photo of this on Facebook so that you can see what I'm talking about. So just search for Talk Law Radio on Facebook, and if you would, just so I know that you're out there, click the like button, and we can communicate that way. Another government agency gets involved for surface water. So there's a difference between surface water and groundwater. Surface water you can see, groundwater is underneath the ground. And that's Texas water quality, TCEQ. Texas Commission of, gosh, I just forgot what that stood for. But anyway, if you want to give your water to somebody else or sell it, you have to notify TCEQ. And the surface water is owned by the state of Texas and holds it in trust for the benefit of the people of Texas. And so now we get into estate planning, which is a hidden legal issue. I said the Texas owns the surface water, but the landowner owns the groundwater, and that's what you might pass on to your beneficiaries. The landowner has the right to capture groundwater beneath the property based on a legal doctrine called the rule of capture. In Texas, applying the rule of capture, landowners have vested property rights in the groundwater extracted from their land. So just like the land itself, water rights are something you can bequeath to your beneficiaries in a last will or living trust. If you have questions about how to make your inheritance, how to leave an inheritance that accomplishes your goals and objectives in a way that's legally enforceable, call an attorney. And attorneys at Marquardt Law Firm focus on business and estate law, including last wills and living trusts. And you can call to schedule an appointment at 210-530-4278. That's 210-530-4278. Or you can learn more at marquardtlawfirm.com. That's MARQUARDT lawfirm.com. So I told you I'd tell you a funny story. Well, I went to college at New Mexico State University in Las Cruces, which was near Elephant Butte. So one time we held a retreat out there at Elephant Butte. And some of the guys were jumping off of this mountain or this rock into the water just because it was exciting to do. But you had to swim to get to it. Well, I thought I would try that too, so I started my swim. About halfway, I got tired. Well, once you get into a body of water and you're swimming, you can't just give up because I would have died. And so I continued to swim, used all the techniques that I learned in swimming lessons when I was a kid to make it to that mountain. And then I could have a little break. But I didn't want to stay on that mountain too long and have too many adult beverages and then be more tired on the way back. So I jumped in the water and immediately swam back. That's not the only funny story. I'll have to tell you a different funny story about Elephant Butte later. So, hope you learned something about water law and the fight between Texas and New Mexico. Hope you enjoyed learning from me here today. Tune in on Saturdays at 11 o'clock in the morning, or find me on podcasts, Facebook Live, or on YouTube. If you would, do me a favor and search for Talk Law Radio on YouTube. So go to the YouTube site, then click the search icon, the little magnifying glass, search for Talk Law Radio, and look for Lady Justice holding the scales of justice and the red, white, and blue logo, and click subscribe. That way you can get a notification every time one of my new shows gets posted there. That's all for today. I'll talk to you later.
This has been Talk Law Radio with attorney Todd Marquardt, brought to you by the Marquardt Law Firm. You can learn more at marquardtlawfirm.com. And be sure to listen to the full Talk Law Radio show Saturday mornings at 11 on 9:30 a.m. The Answer.
Each week, attorney Todd Marquardt talks about the law. His mission with the Talk Law radio show and podcast is to help you discover your legal issue blind spots. In the beginning, God had one law. Don't eat from the fruit of that tree. Then came the Ten Commandments. Now we have federal, state, and municipal lawmakers that won't stop creating new laws. Laws that might impact you without you knowing it. Listen to the show and drop a line on Facebook or email host@talklawradio.com and let the host know what you think of the show, the topics you want to hear, and whether you want to be a guest.